Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Get Into the video, we're going to be discussing the 490 again. That's right, AMD's mysterious graphics card. Now I say mysterious because we know, of course, AMD are working on higher end cards. We know Vega is a thing, for example, but the 490 is probably one of the more mysterious GPUs simply because we don't really know what it is. There are some individuals, including myself, that put some weight on the notion that the card might actually not be released as the 490 and may indeed be coming out as the 500 series. However, I'm somewhat on the fence about this because of Lisa Su. Now, in a recent interview, she has pointed out that Vega is going to be released in the first half of 2017. Now, early reports had said that the card was going to be released much earlier. Now, we do know, of course, that Vega is going to have two main derivatives, Vega 11 and Vega 10. Vega 11 will essentially replace the entire Polaris lineup, while Vega 10 is going to offer much higher performance. In fact, some rumours, and once again how much stock you want to put in those is down to you, say that the card could offer up to 22 T-flops single precision, which is quite frankly bonkers. But a chap by the name of Yalaz, I don't want to give his surname because he's not given me permission to do that, has emailed me over a couple of rather interesting benchmarks from Ashes of the Singularity. Now, there is a GPU device identified only as 687F:C1. Now, this is really interesting because the original GPU, the RX 480, has a very similar ID name. It is 67DF:C7. So once again, to go through that again, the 490, presumably, if it is the 490, has 687F:C1, whereas the 480 is 67DF:C7. Once again, very close. So this brings us to a couple of conclusions, well, possible conclusions. The first is that it is actually Vega, and basically the names are very similar to one another, and it isn't going to be the 400 series, it will be the 500 series, presumably, and Bob's your uncle. The second possibility is it is actually a dual 480 card. Now, some folks have said, well, okay, if it is a dual card, why haven't AMD released it earlier? Now, there are some reports going about that the card is actually going to be Pro. That means, basically, it's going to be aimed not just at gamers, but also for higher-end folks who, for example, want to do VR development or need higher FP32 performance or whatever they need for the card, or they might just want to cough up the extra cash and have that level of performance. There is also another argument to be had, and that is that AMD don't really have anything to counter the GTX 1070 or above. You could say, well, gee, you could just pick up two 480s. You can, but that eats up two PCIe slots. And because Zen is going to be released early next year, it's looking like it's going to be January or February, but that's not official yet, so I don't want to say too much on that, on the exact release date. It looks like that there's two really AM4 boards which most folks are going to want to go for. There's either the B350 or the X370. The X370 has two PCIe slots or more, but the B350 also has overclocking support and is a pretty high-end board, but from what we can tell only has one high-speed PCIe slot and therefore does not support crossfire, in which case that basically says to me, well, you can't really go two 480s with that, can you? So I imagine AMD needs something in the meanwhile to counter the GTX 1070, or there's going to be a lot of folks who are just going to not be able to get a full AMD rig, and therefore they're just going to go with like Nvidia GTX 1080, for example, and a Zen, which I guess still gets AMD some money, but not as much money as they would like. Now, ultimately, there is a lot of speculation here. Unfortunately, there is no information even on the amount of RAM on the card. For example, if we could find out that it said, oh, I don't know, that there were two GPUs running, or there was 16 gigabytes of physical memory, or there was like 8 gigabytes of physical memory per GPU, something like that, we could say, well, hey, we've got some info, but we can't. All we have, for example, is the fact that it has a frame rate on one benchmark of 85, and another one showing that the total score is 8400, which is very close to multiple R9 200 cards, most presumably either 290s or 290Xs, and between that and like a GTX 1080 or a 1070. Another slight issue is that we don't know whether these are final clock speeds. If it's, for the sake of argument, engineering samples, I'm obviously pulling numbers out my ass here, but let's assume that the average, bog standard RX 480 speeds are being used in the multi-GPU configuration of a 490, if it is 490. You're looking at around 1260 megahertz. For all we know, this is running at 1100 megahertz or 1000 megahertz because they don't have the requisite they haven't finalized it yet. So for example, they could still be buggering around to maybe get the heat under control, or maybe messing around with the cooler, or doing whatever, or maybe even the drivers just blow at the moment because they're still tweaking them. Although I don't necessarily know if that would be the case, we don't really know what they're doing. They could still be trying to work on, for example, getting the GPUs to run locally with one another, or it could be they're having power distribution issues and they need to get the clocks slightly lower, or it could be that the card's running absolutely perfectly and they're still doing the final tests and they're trying to figure out yields and maybe doing a few other tweaks and bits and pieces in the back end. It's a bit of a mystery, this card. Personally, I don't have an issue with them releasing it. I'm just hoping that it's not going to be one of those things where 3 weeks after the release date, and obviously I'm being a little exaggerative here, if that was a thing, but still, I think you get the idea, that, 3 weeks later they're like, oh yeah, by the way, here's like the Vega cards, because I think that would upset quite a few people. Generally, you start getting the dual cards, as we all know, just a little bit before we start hearing about the final sampling of the next generation, which is absolutely fine. And there are a couple of cards which this generation have been suspiciously missing in action. The 490 has been MIA for some time. I actually expected it to be released, well, a couple of months ago, to be honest. I expected the 480s, and then for them to probably release a dual version of the card, and then that would be it. They would use that to compete for the next couple of months, and then obviously in 2017 we would see Vega, but that hasn't happened. I'm also pretty surprised that the GTX 1080 Ti's haven't been released by now. There are, once again, a hell of a lot of rumours that tell us that Nvidia are working on a 10GB model, but, well, that's not surfaced. And also the final one, which is definitely sorely missing in my opinion, is the 1060 Ti, which, as I mentioned in just yesterday's video, I do feel would offer a tangible upgrade for folks who need a little extra performance than the stock 1060 can provide, but maybe don't want to plonk down the money on the 1070s. And they could probably do that pretty easily. They could just use like a GP104 core if they needed, and any, let's say, any CUDA cores which are disabled, like let's say that they wanted to go an interim number, say 1400, 1500 CUDA cores, whatever they needed, with a decent amount of memory bandwidth, that would be one way to go. But obviously that also hasn't transpired, which is a bit weird. So I said a whole bunch of words, and this is also an article if you want to check it out. But it's one of those more... I kind of want your opinions on this one, actually. Let me know what you want. I mean, seriously, what would you like? Would you actually want to buy the card at this point? It's a really weird time in the market. I honestly feel that this is probably about the most volatile point in the GPU market that's happened in some time. And the CPU market as well. It's like, if you want an upgrade right now, it's really difficult to say that I'm going to go with a 6700K, or I'm going to go with Kaby Lake, or I'm going to go with this, because you could be kicking yourself in a couple of months. Kaby Lake is a bit disappointing, to be honest. It's a slight upclock over Skylake. Polaris is great for the lower end cards, but For the high-end cards, not so much. The GTX 1070 and the 1080 supposedly are going to have, well, be phased out, and there's going to be refined versions of Pascal, but we're not really sure if that's going to happen. So let me know your thoughts and opinions. Would you want to grab a dual card or not? And if so, what would be the price you would be willing to pay for it? And that is also a bit of a problem, because obviously AMD can't charge more than the 1070. In fact, I would even argue that if it is the price of a 1070 and you could get a single card for that, I've got real issues with dual cards in that particular reason. I've never found them particularly great value, because often the power consumption's going up, and if you happen to get a game which plays silly buggers with dual configuration, it's a bit annoying. It's possible, however, that it's not a dual Polaris. It's possible that they've somehow managed to create an entire new core. But I think with the amount of engineering work that would take, because we know that Polaris 10, the highest configuration is the 36 CUs, compute units, it's probable it would have to either be Vega for the high-end part or dual. But once again, that's assuming that this is even real. But I think there is something out there, but what do you choose to believe? Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. It's been a bit of a mystery one, but I thought I'd put it out there because I want your opinions on this one. Anyway, normal thing, if you've enjoyed the video, do feel free to give it a like and a comment, and yeah, definitely let me know what you think of this one. You can also hit me up on Twitter or Facebook. Let me know your thoughts. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.